This is WFYI News Now. It's August 5th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, Indiana says it's fully divested all public dollars from Chinese companies. And the city of Indianapolis is eyeing new homeless shelters, but not everyone agrees it's the best investment.
Shelter is life-saving and can be life-saving. Shelter does not solve homelessness, though.
Those stories coming up. But first, to help guide a movement to expand solar power in Indiana, community members, small businesses, and city leaders were invited to a solar congress over the weekend. Jill Sheridan reports on the event in Lafayette.
The free event is hosted by Solar United Neighbors, a national nonprofit that helps communities realize solar goals through rooftop installations. Zach Schulk is the program director for Sun in Indiana and says people who attend these gatherings often start asking questions.
Why don't more people have solar? and what can I do to help make it so that Indiana is a state that actually embraces the ability of Hoosiers around the state to, invest in and benefit from rooftop solar?
Schulk says Indiana needs to do more to improve solar policy. He says events like the Solar Congress can be a good place for people to learn how to advocate for more solar opportunities. The last time they had an event in West Central Indiana, they signed up a couple dozen residents to solar panel programs. I'm Jill Sheridan.
Indiana officials announced the state has fully divested all public dollars from Chinese companies. As Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith reports, it's been over a year since the legislature required the state to sever financial ties with Chinese interests.
The 2023 law made Indiana the first state, and still one of only 5 in the country, to force all public pension funds to divest from any company based in China or any company controlled by the Chinese government. Republican Senator Chris Garton, the legislation's author, cites growing tensions between the U.S. and China as a motivator for the law. Garton says removing the possibility of China freezing U.S. assets and harming public employees is simply good policy. When the law was passed unanimously, Indiana had more than $1 billion invested in Chinese entities. The measure gave the state 5 years to fully divest, but the Indiana public retirement system was able to accomplish it in just over a year. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
And for our final story today, the city of Indianapolis is poised to launch a new shelter and bring 150 new beds to the city's homeless. However, some community advocates say the city should instead invest in more housing and wonder why Indianapolis can't model efforts that similar cities have used to reduce chronic homelessness. Side Effects Public Media's Ben Thorpe has more.
Heaven Stevens was 20 years old when she was homeless on the streets of Indianapolis. During that time, she visited Outreach, a program for homeless young adults between 14 and 24. It gives them a place to stay, meals, and access to laundry and a bathroom during the day.
After they told me that, I just made a beeline for Outreach. I was like, okay, you can eat, you can shower for free. And I'm like, okay, cool.
Outreach also got Stevens into a pool of people across the city waiting for housing. That pool is managed by a group of community partners who identify who in the city most needs to be housed, prioritizing the elderly, pregnant, or those fleeing abuse.
I was like, okay, I'm on the list for housing. Like, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, I really didn't think it was actually real until it started happening.
It took a year and a half of waiting for Heaven to get housed. But many of the people who end up on the city's waiting lists won't. The Indianapolis Housing Agency makes only 30 vouchers available for community partners managing homelessness to dole out every month. But the pool of people waiting for a voucher is regularly around 1,500. Indy's unsheltered population has jumped from 105 in 2019 to over 300 in 2024. The unsheltered homeless are people on the street with nowhere else to go.
What it comes back to is investment in housing.
This is Chelsea Herron-Cozy, the executive director of the Coalition for Homelessness Intervention and Prevention, or CHIP. She says she is worried about the city's plan to invest in a new shelter instead of devoting more resources towards housing.
Shelter is life-saving and can be life-saving. Shelter does not solve homelessness, though.
City officials say the low-barrier shelter will help meet the needs of the homeless, while also getting them into the pool for more permanent housing. But critics regularly point to other cities that have made strides to reduce homelessness populations. One of those is Milwaukee, which in 2022 was recognized by the federal government for having the lowest per capita number of unsheltered homelessness in the country. Officials there, including Milwaukee County Housing Administrator Jim Matthey, say it's because of an aggressive prioritization of housing. Matthey and his team have worked directly with landlords to get people housed, instead of waiting for new units to be built.
We're going to pay the security deposit, and the tenant's going to pay 30% of their income. We're going to pay the rest. But what we found, even with our investments in services, we are saving a ton of taxpayer money.
Those savings come from less contact with both the criminal justice and healthcare systems. The initiative is possible, he says, because it has largely been managed under one roof. In Indianapolis, homelessness services are managed by some 30 partners. Earlier this year, the federal government stepped in to take over the Indianapolis agency that oversees housing vouchers. During the announcement of oversight, a federal official told reporters that 17% of the city's housing vouchers were not being used because, quote, people did not want to put in the hard work.
The voucher program wasn't working right. Not much was working right.
Andrew Merkley, with the city's Division of Homelessness and Eviction Prevention, says improvements are underway, but he acknowledged that the city is not moving people into housing fast enough.
The community's plan to end homelessness wants to reduce that time that it takes to get housed. And I think right now we're not meeting the goals in that plan.
With the U.S. Supreme Court ruling earlier this summer that cities are allowed to remove homeless residents sleeping outdoors, community leaders say efforts to improve the city's homelessness programs can't come fast enough. I'm Ben Thorpe, Side Effects Public Media.
Side Effects Public Media is a health reporting collaboration of NPR member stations across the Midwest, based here at WFYI. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by Drew Daudelin, with support from the news team at WFYI and public media journalists across the state. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. Kendall Antron produced our music, and I'm your host, Abriana Herron. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.